from a chart of accounts perspective, how NetSuite was built was based on different dimensions. So it allows you to manage a smaller chart of accounts that's shared across multiple entities. And within each of those chart of accounts, you have the concept of a parent-child relationship. In each of those, so it's a small type of chart of accounts that you're managing, and then you're able to go ahead and use different dimensions or segments that you're tagging to build out that chart of accounts. So what we have here is our subsidiary. So this would be all the different legal entities within NetSuite. And then you have your natural chart of accounts. So that would be your number, your account, maybe it's 6371 for audit fees. And then natively you have three different types of dimensions or segments. So that's your department, marketing, operations, facilities, whatever that might be. And then you have class, and sometimes we see this renamed as business unit, revenue type, whatever dimension you're managing. And then we have location. It could be office location, different geographical locations. Now, at any point in time, if you have a different dimension that you want to report on, you can go ahead and create a custom segment and report off that specific attribute. So you're not, from day one when you go and implement NetSuite, you're not locked down during that implementation process to define this long string of accounts within NetSuite, but it's flexible. As you continue to grow and expand at any point in time, you can go ahead, define this custom segment 3 years from now, and then report off that specific attribute. So it's about being able to define these within the system and give you that dimensional chart of accounts that are all linked to the underlying transactions, your customers, your vendors, your employees, those entity records, as well as the invoices, journal entries. And what that kind of looks like, that legacy system, there's your long string and chart of accounts, and you can see how that would be mapped to NetSuite. You have that subsidiary, your natural account, department, business unit, location, and maybe you have a custom segment for your different revenue types. What NetSuite does is it really just allows you to manage a smaller chart of accounts. So you have that natural string, and then you're just slicing and dicing by tagging that to different dimensions. So instead of having to define everything in this legacy long string of accounts, you're able to manage a smaller chart of accounts and then build on these different attributes or dimensions that you're now tagging. So, for subsidiary, you might have those different, these would be your 10 legal entities, your different departments that could continue on and on, your locations, some of those business units that you have, and then maybe this custom segment for revenue type, whatever that might look like. And to take this one step further, what it looks like in NetSuite is, let's say we're going through a use case here and we're entering in a specific vendor bill or vendor invoice for some audit fees. We can see here I'm going ahead associating this specific vendor bill, vendor invoice to PwC, who's my vendor. And then I'm going in and really just tagging it to those segments. So we know that this is associated to our parent company, that headquarter type legal entity. And then I'm defining that GL natural string of account. These are going to be linked to our audit fees. And then what other information is associated to this? We can see it's for our operations, our corporate type of class, and then our corporate headquarters, our location, and here's the specific amount. So from a reporting perspective, when we now look at this inside of NetSuite, we can go ahead and slice and dice these income statements by those different segments or dimensions that we defined within the system. So we can see here for our audit fees, when we go ahead and throw this out by our business unit, just the corporate specific business unit is associated to that 15,000. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of reporting from that perspective, by slicing and dicing by those different dimensions. And then again, just to kind of summarize the NetSuite versus the legacy type system, you don't need that long GL string of accounts. You're now going to have the flexibility to tag those different dimensions appropriate to each transaction within the system. Now we can go ahead and take a look at kind of, what does that really look like in NetSuite? So what I want to do is start out by taking a look at the subsidiary navigator. So this is a visual graphic that's going to allow me to, have things and drill down into underlying details. So we can see here that we have our parent, we have our child entities, and then we have even maybe grandchildren to this specific legal structure. I can go ahead and drill down to a specific entity, and all the information on my dashboard is going to now reflect to that legal entity. you can see that there has been no transaction so far for this fiscal period for this entity A. I can now go ahead and take a look at that US1 entity. The system's going to go ahead and consolidate all that information for these 3 underlying grandchildren to go ahead and consolidate into this specific legal entity. And then again, I can go ahead and manage that back up into my parent entity. So this is really what I'm focusing on as a controller who has access to all these underlying legal entities. But you might have that use case where you have a specific account executive or someone within your operations that can only access 1 or 2 legal entities. So what that would look like, just to kind of give you a visual, if I go ahead and log into this account executive type role, I've only granted them access to 2 legal entities or subsidiaries. So now their dashboard, they're only going to be able to access those specific entities. And now if I wanted to go ahead and run a specific financial report, let's go ahead and throw out this income statement. I'm only going to have permission to slice and dice this by those specific US2 and US3. I don't have permission to access any of those A, B, or C or US1 legal entities. So that's one way that you can manage those permissions within the system. And again, you could have the consolidated view, or maybe you're just looking at that individual legal entity. I'll go ahead and go back to our controller role that has a little bit more access for demonstration purposes here. But what I want to highlight now too is being able to run that financial statement and access by all those different dimensions. So if we go ahead and throw out the specific income statement, we'll go ahead and we'll look at it for this specific fiscal year. At this ribbon down at the bottom, this is where I can slice and dice this report by all different criteria. Here we're looking at a specific period. We're going to take a look at a consolidated view, and maybe I want to throw this out by all my different subsidiaries. I can use that hierarchy view to see that parent-child relationship within the system. So not too much data, but we can see a couple attributes within those subsidiaries. Or maybe I want to go ahead and throw this out by a specific business unit. Again, I can refresh this information. I'm going to be able to see, for that risk group, maybe I have a child risk group A, child risk group B. That parent-child type of relationship exists within the system, and I can see those different revenues and operating expense. Or maybe I want more information. I want to backdate this to, I'll go ahead and we'll take a look at here, and we'll look at it last fiscal year, and I want to now throw this out by a specific accounting period. I can refresh all this information, and now I'm looking at a side-by-side to see how we're performing on a month-to-month basis. And of course, with any type of report in NetSuite, if I needed to, I could go ahead and drill down into these underlying details. I also have the option to go ahead and export this into Excel or a PDF type format. And as we started the beginning of the presentation, I was able to view all of this information, based on it as a consumer of information through different schedules to push this information out. This is where I could go ahead and set up that frequency. How often do I want to communicate this specific report to either an internal user or maybe externally to a client type person from the firm? Go ahead, define that frequency, and then those recipients here.